Paul Gascoigne is seen as one of the most talented footballers of his generation, period. Not just English player, but across the whole of Europe. But for those too young to have seen him play, all they will have seen is a drunk bloke and even worse manager who liked to mess around a lot. So after some extensive research, Wikipedia, I'm here to answer the question, just how good was Gazza really? Stick around to find out. Named Paul John after a couple of blokes in a band, Gazza suffered tragedy when aged 10 his friend was killed by a car and effectively died in Gazza's arms, and around this time developed twitches and OCD traits. Gazza later started his career at Newcastle where he was brought into the first team by manager Jack Charlton. Club legend Jackie Milburn even commented on how good a 17-year-old Gazza was when he started out. Not a bad player to praise you, a guy who was still second on the all-time scoring list even though he left the club in 1957. Around this time another friend died in an accident on a building site, and Gazza always blamed himself for the deaths of both friends. After a couple of good seasons at Newcastle, during which Milburn described Gazza as the best player in the world, a bit of an exaggeration, but he was clearly one of the most talented players of his generation, Gazza was starting to turn heads and grab life by the balls. No, sorry, that was Vinnie Jones, making sure that Gazza didn't get too big for his boots, although they later became good friends. Gazza promised Man United manager Alex Ferguson that he'd sign for United, and Fergie went on holiday safe in the knowledge that he'd finished the deal when he got back, enjoying his holiday in the sun with a beer, until he found out, on holiday in the summer of 1988, that Gazza had signed for Spurs instead, which surely raised Fergie's blood pressure a few levels. Spurs manager Terry Venables paid just over £2 million to bring him from Newcastle, which at the time was a big fee, especially for a young un. Signing on demand were a house for his parents, a convertible BMW for his dad and a sunbed for his sister, all agreed by Spurs. And he joined the season after Glenn Hoddle left, big boots to fill, and his competitive debut for them? Against Newcastle, one of football's little coincidences, and he repaid the faith by scoring in his first home match against rivals Arsenal, with his bare foot no less. But what was so good about him? Why did Tottenham Hotspur pay so much for a player that his own manager described as a bit tubby? Well, Gazza was deceptive. Superb control, balance, strength, dribbling and a really misleading change of pace. He realised early on that he'd need good upper body strength for defenders to bounce off him, so he used to borrow equipment from Newcastle's training ground to improve his strength and to better his chances of becoming pro. Many players, including John Barnes, said he's the hardest trainer they'd ever seen. He had not only a great shot on him, but also had a ridiculous footballing brain. His vision, timing, imagination, all top class. In fact, Fergie said in his autobiography that the biggest surge of excitement in his career was watching Ronaldo in the match before signing him. No surprises there, the bloke loves him. His second biggest surge of excitement? Watching Gazza in a match, in particular a moment when he nutmegged Remy Moses and patted him on the head as he went past, then watched as he danced rings around his midfield. Fergie went into a rage, his words not mine, and when he calmed down he tried to sign him that same day. Fergie would end up signing Paul Ince when he missed out on Gazza. And as we head into the 90s, the decade of shell suits, pogs and the PlayStation, Gazza mania really took off. You see, back in '88, Gazza played his first England match against Denmark. Well, I say played his first match, he played about 10 minutes, but you know what I mean, and played a handful of matches up to the World Cup, enough to get him into the England team for Italia 90. Some achievement considering he was selected alongside quality like Chris Waddle, Brian Robson, John Barnes, Dave Platt and Steve Hodge, but he'd never started a competitive international before the tournament. But who'd have thought it, as he left Ronald Koeman for dead in the group, assisted Platz winning in the quarter-final, and outside German legend Lothar Matthäus in the semi-final, where he looked the most inventive player on the pitch. It's well documented in that match that Gazza fouled Thomas Berthold to get a yellow card, which would have kept him out the final. Gazza ran over to Berthold as he rolled on the floor a million times. Fair play, Gazza, an absolute art of gold, checking on his fallen opponent. How lovely. Until it transpired that what he was actually doing was squeezing his lips together, trying to stop him from screaming, so the ref wouldn't hear. So Gazza. Out came the yellow, where Gazza turned into a big blubbering mess, but the public fell in love with him. It was front page news. Comedy show Spitting Image even had a puppet of him, which predictably kept crying. The irony is that when England lost on penalties, Gascoigne was supposed to be taking one of them, the only reason he didn't being that he was too emotional. I bet Gazza was devastated when he got back to England, apart from laughing and joking with a pair of plastic tits, but the public fell back in love with this England team. England had a troubling run up to the World Cup, awful in the Euros in '88, not much better in qualifying for the World Cup, on the back of a lot of high-profile hooliganism, to the point the Italian authorities shoved the England team on the island of Sardinia, where they couldn't cause as much mayhem, and English teams being banned from European competitions after the Hazel Stadium disaster meant that English players were leaving the country, as evidenced by the fact that more players in that World Cup squad played for Rangers in Scotland than any one English club. The end of that year brought in the BBC Sports Personality of the Year award, and Gazza's blubbering babiness made the nation fall in love with the team again. Gazza was big news, appearing in TV adverts and talk shows, even a deal with Adidas later in his career, but they were only interested in him bringing in viewers. Nobody was interested in his well-being. The FA Cup the following year was Gazza's only English honour, and even then he received his medal in hospital. Gazza mostly dragged Spurs through the tournament, and in the semi-final against Arsenal, despite only just coming back from a hernia operation, Gazza smashed in a free kick from 30 yards, another one of his specialties, and Spurs won the match 3-1. But in the final, Gazza wasn't himself. He Jackie Chan'd Gary Parker, but luckily for him the referee was blind, and shortly after he lunged wildly at Forest defender Gary Charles, and Gazza suffered a serious cruciate ligament injury, as opposed to a mild cruciate ligament injury. It marked the end of his career at Spurs, and to make it worse, Stuart Pearce scored from that free kick. And to make it even worse, referee Roger Milford later worked for the FA assessing referees, which might explain the current standards, but anyway. The irony is that just 3 weeks before his injury, Lazio made an agreement to sign him for £8 million, which wasn't finalised as Gazza wanted to play the final as a Spurs player, the final in which a few of the Lazio management were in the crowd watching as he shattered his knee, but Lazio were now forced to wait more than a year for his knee to heal, during which time Spurs lost nearly half the transfer fee, and for good measure he had a scrap in a nightclub and broke his kneecap in the same leg. Gazza thought that this fight was a set-up and started to become withdrawn and stopped trusting people, which was kind of confirmed a few years later when his personal assistant, who was by his side for many years, wrote a book spilling the beans on Gazza. Every time I asked for help, she was writing it down in a book. On the pitch, even though Spurs lost money, the fee was still a club and British record when he eventually moved to Lazio in 1992. Gazza's time in Italy coincided perfectly with the boom in the Italian game in the UK. Boomers like me had Football Italia on TV, which Gazza was a regular on. Lazio were on the up at the time, and Gazza was the first big money buy of a big money era. Probably didn't know it when he said to the president, "Your daughter, big tits," but still 1,000 fans turned up to greet him in Rome. Training sessions were mobbed, but this wasn't the same Gazza. Fans expecting a chubby, cheeky bloke instead got a guy who'd been on a crash diet, who was overly thin, lacked energy, and was subbed off at half-time in his first match, which Gazza claims was due to a dead leg. But the fans loved Gazza himself. His drinking, his love of football, his craziness, his genius, even his belly. The club said that attendances increased by anything up to 10k just by his presence, and when he scored a last-minute equaliser against Roma, that really endeared him to the fans, before he followed it up with a brilliant solo goal against Pescara. And talking of Roma, their fans loved to target him. In one match they held up an enormous fake wheelchair due to him always being injured, and in another match they threw Mars bars onto the pitch, where Gazza picked one up, slowly unwrapped it and smashed it down his throat. The Roma fans used to sing about the drunkard with an earring, because he drank a lot and wore an earring obviously, but a match against Juventus was the start of the end for the cheeky Geordie. After a series of small injuries he was dropped for a match against the old lady. When a journalist asked him about the decision on live TV, he replied with this. There was uproar. A politician called for an official inquiry. The club president fined him and said in an interview that he wouldn't buy any more English players. It wasn't even his first dodgy interview.
No.
Did he learn his lesson? Well, just a few weeks later he farted at another journalist, but Gazza was struggling. Around this time Lazio played a friendly against Sevilla, not just any Sevilla side though. The match was sold as Gazza versus Maradona, the only time in their careers that they play against each other. One of them scored a great solo goal for their team. I'll give you a clue, it wasn't Maradona. But when friends asked about the goal afterwards, he said he couldn't remember any of it. Gazza only turned up for the match 45 minutes before after going missing for days, during which he went on a bender to Disneyland, which he did in protest at having to play the match in the first place. In April '94, Gazza broke his leg in training after flying into a tackle with Alessandro Nesta. The Lazio fans reacted by booing Nesta for weeks afterwards. It was a year before he played for Lazio again, and by this point the management had had enough. I ain't surprised. That year he played 6 matches in a row, the most he'd played in a row for 4 years. That's mad. During this time, Gascoigne was drinking silly amounts, and by this point he was described as an alcoholic masquerading as a professional athlete, which explains his inconsistent performances, his ups and downs in weight and mood swings. As early as March 1994, he was seen to walk out of Lazio training and shout and cry in the car park. Gazza came to be known as a bidone in Italy. So what does bidone mean? Maverick perhaps? Genius? Legend? No, bidoni in Italy is rubbish bin, but in football terms are rubbish players or cult players, so bad they've become popular. Bidoni were known to be expensive footballers, a name most associated in Italy with Gazza. Only from watching footage years later can we perhaps see that he wasn't moving the same as he did before his injury, and his thoughts were occupied by his crumbling relationship with his girlfriend. He left for Rangers in 1995. Nobody really shed any tears. He never really settled into the team, and it's believed that many Italians had problems with the English in general, coming from a series of failed English players in the 60s who hit the drink and had bad discipline. And after the Heysel Stadium disaster, all that Gazza's childish antics did was to confirm the stereotype of the drunken hooligan. But simply, Gazza was not funny for the Italians. He reminded them of tragedies, old and new. Rangers paid £4.3 million for him, again a large amount, and repaid them with 14 league goals in 95-96, helping Rangers to the league and cup. In fact, it was a Gascoigne hat-trick that confirmed the league title, and he was voted Scotland's Player of the Year at the end of the season. Not bad for a player who downed a shot of brandy before every match to get him fired up. And at the end of that season came Euro 96. A mixed tournament for Gazza, despite what others might say, breaking out the Rabona passes, scoring a wonder goal against Scotland against his Rangers teammate Andy Gorham, but being mostly anonymous for the other 8 to 9 minutes, playing well against the Netherlands but was mostly forgettable that tournament. Wouldn't have been so forgettable if he had size 9 boots instead of 8 to get onto the end of this Shearer ball, but after getting knocked out, that was the end of his England career. Manager Glenn Hoddle didn't choose Gascoigne or Matt Letizia for France 98, meaning that 1990 was his only World Cup, and he finished with 57 caps, which scandalously put him behind Phil Neville and Emile Heskey for caps. And 98 was also the end of his time north of the border too. He was accused of rape while he was at Rangers, which caused him to drink even more to cope, and let's just say that eccentric behaviour forced Rangers to sell him to Middlesbrough, who were managed by ex-England teammate Brian Robson. Eccentric behaviour included when he played an imaginary flute against Celtic, a celebration with a political background for which he was fined 20 grand, and even received death threats from the IRA, and when he booked referee Dougie Smith, who had a massive sense of humour failure and booked him back, and it always makes me laugh how he's looking for the card in his pockets even though it's in his hand as Gazza's just given it to him. And after a promising start at Borough, his career took a bit of a nosedive, never settling or convincing at Everton under his old Rangers manager Walter Smith, and around this time at the age of 33 he was finally diagnosed as an alcoholic. He later played for Burnley, Wolves reserves and in China, but these spells were mostly interrupted by personal issues, drinking problems and stints in rehab, not helped by sneaky paparazzi who just wanted the latest story whatever the cost. The first stint in rehab came after an incident where he went to a train station to, let's just say, introduce himself to a train, and he would have done if it wasn't for the fact that there were no more trains due that day. Shortly after, Brian Robson took him to the Priory Psychiatric Hospital for support. In 2005 he became manager of Kettering in the 6th tier and said that he was at the club for the long haul, which is true if long haul meant 39 days, which is how long it took for him to be sacked after the chairman claimed he was under the influence of alcohol during matches and training sessions, which Gazza says was untrue and was actually sacked because he called the chairman out for interfering in the team too much. But by this point he was looking ill as he puffed cigarette after cigarette on the sidelines, and within hours of the Kettering bust-up he found himself in a police cell in Liverpool after having a barney with a photographer, and the irony is it was sacked the same week as George Best's funeral, another talented player who battled the drink. But deep down, when the drink wasn't mashing his brain, Gazza had a heart of gold. He kept giving money away at Newcastle to other players, which prompted manager Jack Charlton to put half his wage into a bank account for him to collect at the end of his first contract, and after receiving his 100 grand signing on fee at Spurs, he spent 70k of it on buying a house for his parents. In one interview after his first big contract, he was asked what a young man spends so much money on. Without hesitation he replied, "A car for my dad." He gave anything up to 100 grand to charities every year. He liked to keep morale up, and his pranks are well documented, such as when he put a snake in Roberto Di Matteo's pocket, the time he stole Middlesbrough's brand new team bus and crashed it into the field, the time he asked the team physio to drive his car and then reported his car stolen to the police, or the time he hid a fish in Gordon Dewey's car which stunk his car out so bad that not only did he have to sell it, but nobody would buy it due to the smell, and the chairman forced him to buy Dewey a new car, a prank which cost Gazza 17 grand. And remember when Vinny grabbed Gazza in a place that no man should ever be grabbed? Who could forget when Dean Windass tried to do the same, but Gazza pulled his shorts down, and let's just say that Windass was holding more in his hand than he bargained for. But pranks probably helped take Gazza away from his troubles. He even sang a song in 1990 which reached number 2 in the charts. And nothing hits home about Gazza's troubles quite like an odd situation in 2010. And if you've never heard this story before, maybe you're not from the UK, strap in because it's a bit weird. In July 2010, a guy called Raoul Moat shot 3 people. After a week-long search, he was tracked to a field in Northumberland, and there was a standoff with police while he held a gun to his neck. Picture this: the scene involved 160 armed officers, sniper teams, helicopters, a TV survival expert, and Gascoigne. Gazza turned up at the crime scene all the way from Newcastle wearing a dressing gown and carrying a fishing rod, a can of lager, some chicken, some bread and a mobile phone, and attempted to speak to Moat by claiming to be a good friend of his. The officers refused him access. In the early hours of the next morning, Moat shot himself. In September the same year, Gazza admitted publicly that he didn't even know Moat, so what was he playing at? He later said that he'd been on a drug and alcohol binge and couldn't even remember the events of that night. I was like, what have I done? I've got a chicken by my side, fishing rod, a barber. I'm like, F me, I must have done something. I turned on Sky News. Paul Gascoigne was there last night. Utterly bizarre. In recent years he'd been doing well to beat the drink, probably helped by the fact he had anti-alcohol pellets sewn into his stomach which made him feel sick if he has too much, a procedure just like a clockwork orange, except for a bad year in 2016 when a family bereavement led to a relapse. But simply put, on his playing day he was a genius. He could pass the ball to perfection and turn a game in an instant, but he was easily provoked, he'd sulk or show off and didn't have the temperament to handle his talent. Plus 27 operations in his career would surely slow him down, along with diagnosed illnesses such as panic attacks, paranoia, bipolar disorder, eating disorders, depression, alcoholism and drug use, which even included morphine. But despite his problems he was loved. The football public in England is basically working class, who like players who have flaws, players like Best, Jimmy Johnstone and Gascoigne. We see reflections of ourselves in these imperfect heroes. And imperfect is the right way to describe him. His ex-wife Cheryl divorced him in 1998 after years of mental and physical abuse, and one night Gazza butchered her because she laughed at another man's joke, and she'd been seen with various injuries. I won't comment on that as this video is about Gazza the player, not the man, and I wasn't there, spying through his bedroom window or anything, but the quotes from those who played with him or knew him say it all. Fergie said that Gazza was the best in England to lift you off your seat. Paul Ince said he was the best he'd ever played with. Similar quotes from Brian Laudrup, Les Ferdinand, Stuart Pearce, Wayne Rooney, even the other special one himself. Not all quotes were complimentary though. Bobby Robson said he's as daft as a brush, which then prompted Gascoigne to turn up to training with a brush in his sock. Newcastle chairman Stan Seymour Jr. said he's George Best without brains, and Best himself said that he wears the number 10 jersey. I thought it was his position, but turns out it's his IQ. But the most poignant quote about Gascoigne came from Gascoigne himself when he said in his autobiography, "I fulfilled my dreams but did not fulfill my potential. Now I can move on, I hope. Don't know where though, I wish I did." And that's it, thanks for watching. Watch these on screen because they're awesome, in my opinion anyway. You're awesome for watching and see you later. Well, I won't see you later. This isn't like a two-way website, I can't see you. In fact, being honest, you won't even see me because I don't tend to appear in my videos, so nobody's seen anybody really. But you know what I mean. I'm going to stop waffling now and say thanks for watching and I hope you have a great day.